Welcome back to Voices of the Soul. Sometimes you stumble across something online that just makes you think, and today we're diving into one of those things.
And what would that be?
A Reddit thread on Ask Reddit that posed a simple question. What do you miss about being young?
Oh, that's a good one. I can see how that could spark some interesting conversations.
Yeah, hundreds of comments pouring in, each one a little window into someone's personal experience with that universal feeling of nostalgia.
I bet there are some common threads there, things we all kind of miss as we get older.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today. We're talking about the perception of time, those carefree days, boundless energy, good health, and that magical sense of discovery that seems to fade a bit as we get older.
Definitely relatable. Along the way, we'll look at some of those comments and maybe even see if we can uncover some insights about how to hold on to that youthful spirit as we journey through adulthood.
Sounds good. Let's jump right in. The top comment in the thread goes straight to this feeling of time.
Oh, how so?
As a kid, it felt like summer vacation lasted forever.
Right. Time seemed to stretch out, full of possibilities.
And then at some point that shifts and the years just seem to fly by.
It's such a common experience, like someone hit fast forward on your life.
Yeah, and one user perfectly captured that feeling, describing it as hitting fast forward after college, marriage, and kids.
And what happened?
Suddenly they're 46 and
Ugh.
can't believe how 20 years have just vanished.
Wow. There's actually a theory in psychology that helps explain why this happens called the proportional theory of time perception. It suggests that as we accumulate more experiences, each new year represents a smaller proportion of our overall life.
Interesting. So a year for a 5-year-old is literally 20% of their life,
Exact.
making it feel so much longer and more significant than a year for, say, a 50-year-old.
Precisely. And even just being aware of this can shift our perspective. Instead of getting caught up in the daily grind, we might find that if we really focus on filling our days with meaningful experiences, time feels a bit more expansive no matter how old we are.
I like that. A little call to action to be more present.
Definitely.
Okay, and speaking of things we might long for, another major theme that popped up in the Reddit thread is carefree living.
Oh, yeah. So many people miss that. Just not having all the responsibilities that adulthood brings. Back when your biggest worry was like losing your favorite toy or something.
I know. And it's so interesting to see the contrast between those comments and the ones from adults who are now juggling work, bills, family obligations, all of it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, though, if it's really just about having less on your plate or if there's something deeper there.
Well, that's what's fascinating, because even some folks who had it tough as kids, who maybe experienced poverty or other challenges, still look back on those years as being carefree.
That's a really good point. It almost suggests that carefree isn't always about our circumstances, but about our mindset.
You mean that sense of lightness and presence that isn't tied to external factors?
Exactly.
I wonder if it's possible to cultivate that as adults, even when we have all these responsibilities.
I think it's definitely worth exploring. Practices like mindfulness and gratitude, those can be really helpful in shifting our focus away from worry and anxiety.
So maybe allowing us to experience those little moments of joy and lightness, even amidst the chaos.
Exactly. It's like reclaiming a piece of that inner freedom.
I love that. All right, so we've talked about the perception of time, carefree living. Now let's move on to something else that folks mentioned missing. Boundless energy, remember that?
Oh, yeah, how could I forget? So many people talking about how napping used to be optional, not like a survival tactic.
Right, like you chose to nap because you felt like it, not because your body was demanding it.
Exactly. And it's interesting because there actually are physiological changes happening as we age that can impact our energy levels. It's not just in our heads.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So what's going on in our bodies that causes this shift?
Well, for one, as we get older, our bodies produce less collagen.
Collagen, I thought that was just a wrinkle thing.
Oh, it's way more than wrinkles. Collagen plays a huge role in joint health and flexibility. So when we have less of it, our joints can get stiff and achy, which can make us feel less energetic overall.
Interesting. So it's like our bodies are literally getting a bit less springy.
Yeah, kind of. And then, of course, there's just general wear and tear from years of, living.
Right. Which might explain why some people in the thread talked about feeling like their bodies were kind of betraying them.
Yeah, aches and pains seemingly popping up out of nowhere.
But you're saying even though some of that is a natural part of aging, we're not totally powerless when it comes to our energy levels.
Right. Lifestyle choices play a huge role here.
Like what?
Well, regular exercise, A balanced diet, prioritizing sleep, all those things can make a world of difference.
So maybe we don't have the same boundless energy as a teenager, but we can still take steps to support our bodies and feel more vibrant.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to shift gears a bit now and talk about something a little more intangible. That magical feeling of experiencing things for the first time.
Ah, yes, the wonder of discovery. That really resonated with people in the thread.
There was one quote that I thought perfectly captured it. How magical everything seemed, discovering and experiencing the joys of life for the very first time.
Beautiful. And so true, there's something special about those first-time experiences, a sense of awe and possibility that's hard to replicate later on.
Yeah, you really feel that sense of longing in these comments, like people recognizing that they can't truly go back and recapture that feeling.
But the good news is there's always something new to discover, even as we get older.
You think so?
Absolutely. Maybe it's not as dramatic as seeing the ocean for the first time, but even finding joy in those little everyday things can help us reignite that spark.
Hmm. So how do we do that? How do we hold on to that sense of wonder and keep exploring new things when life gets so busy?
I love this concept from Zen Buddhism called beginner's mind.
Oh, what's that?
It encourages us to approach experiences with openness and curiosity, as if we were seeing them for the very first time, letting go of preconceived notions and just allowing ourselves to be surprised.
I like that. It's like intentionally choosing to see the world through fresh eyes.
Exactly.
Okay, well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more thing that came up in the thread, and that's relationships.
Ah, yes. Connections. Such a vital part of the human experience, especially when we're young.
Definitely. There were so many comments about missing those simple, heartfelt connections from childhood.
Right. Those friendships that seemed so effortless, where hanging out was as simple as ringing a doorbell and just riding bikes until the streetlights came on.
Yeah, like no planning, no overthinking, just pure connection.
One user put it perfectly. I miss friendships. There was something so simple and easy about them when we were younger.
It really does make you long for that time when connection felt so effortless.
It does.
But of course, as we get older, things change. Life gets more complicated.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore how those early friendships shape our understanding of connection as we move through life and how to navigate those changes. Welcome back to Voices of the Soul. You know, it's amazing how those simple, heartfelt connections from childhood can leave such a lasting impression on us.
They really do.
Yeah.
And in the Reddit thread, you could just feel this longing for that effortless camaraderie, that feeling of just belonging and being understood without even having to try.
Yeah, like you didn't have to explain yourself, you just were.
Exactly. But as we get older, maintaining those connections often takes a bit more work. Life happens, responsibilities pile up, we end up on different paths.
Right. And sometimes we find ourselves drifting apart from the people who were once so central to our world. It's a pretty common experience.
Definitely. And one user described it as feeling like they were on a totally different trajectory from their childhood friends.
Oh, how so?
Well, they talked about how their paths diverged as they pursued different careers, started families, or even just moved to different cities.
That makes sense.
Right.
And that can be tough.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of melancholy in those comments, like a recognition that sometimes friendships have to evolve if they're going to survive all the changes that life throws our way.
Absolutely. And that evolution can be challenging. It takes effort to stay in touch, to make time for each other when everyone's schedules are packed. And sometimes you have to be open to the ways those friendships might change.
Because the truth is, holding on to those deep, meaningful connections takes work. It's about showing up for each other even when it's not convenient, and being willing to put in the effort to nurture those bonds.
And you know, the payoff is huge. Those friendships that stand the test of time, they're truly invaluable. They provide a sense of continuity, a shared history, a level of understanding that's hard to find anywhere else.
It's that feeling of knowing that someone's got your back, no matter what. And even though those adult friendships might require a bit more effort than those carefree childhood bonds, they can be just as rewarding, if not more so.
I agree, but it's also not just about clinging to those old friendships. It's about being open to new connections, recognizing that our circles of support can continue to grow and change throughout our lives.
Right, because as we evolve, our needs and interests change. And we might find ourselves drawn to people we wouldn't have necessarily connected with when we were younger. It's kind of cool how that happens.
Yeah, I know. I love that one user shared the story about how a chance encounter at a bookstore led to this deep, unexpected friendship that ended up changing their whole perspective on life. Isn't that great?
It is. It's a great reminder that it's never too late to make new friends, to find those connections that bring joy and support into our lives.
And those connections can pop up in the most unexpected places. It could be a colleague you start grabbing coffee with, a neighbor you strike up a conversation with while you're walking the dog, or maybe someone you meet through a shared hobby or interest. The possibilities are endless.
It's about keeping our hearts open to the possibility of connection, even when life gets busy and we feel like we don't have the time or energy.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So speaking of things that can get in the way of connection, quite a few people in the thread also talked about this feeling of disillusionment, particularly with societal structures or just the world at large.
That's interesting. It makes sense, though, as we age, we become more aware of the complexities and imperfections of the world, right? We start to see things that maybe we were shielded from in our youth. And I could see how that could lead to a sense of cynicism or even disappointment.
Yeah, one user summed it up perfectly. They just wrote, "I miss believing that the world was a fair and just place. Now I know better."
Wow. That's pretty powerful. And while it's a bit of a stark perspective, I think it reflects a common experience. As we gain more life experience, we encounter situations that challenge those beliefs, that force us to confront the realities of injustice, inequality, and suffering.
It's almost like that moment you realize Santa Claus isn't real, but on a much grander scale.
Exactly.
The world suddenly feels a little bit less magical and a lot more complicated.
Right. And it's definitely a jarring transition. For some, it might lead to a sense of disillusionment or apathy, a feeling of, well, what's the point?
Like things are just beyond their control.
Yeah. But for others, that awareness can actually become a catalyst for action. They channel that disillusionment into something positive. Maybe it's getting involved in activism or volunteering or just making more conscious choices in their daily lives.
It's about recognizing that even though the world isn't perfect, we can still make a difference, contribute to positive change in our own ways, big or small.
Absolutely. And that sense of agency, that feeling of I can actually do something, that can be really empowering, especially in the face of all that disillusionment.
It's about reclaiming our power to shape our own lives and hopefully contribute to a better world, even if it's just a tiny little corner of it.
So well said. Well, while we're talking about things that can be both challenging and empowering, I want to shift gears just a bit and talk about another theme that came up in the Reddit thread: physical changes that come with aging.
Oh, yeah. Let's be real. We all feel those effects of time on our bodies, don't we? And it's no surprise that people miss that feeling of vitality and resilience that we often have in our youth.
Definitely. There were so many comments about missing the days when they could stay up all night, eat whatever they wanted, and bounce back from anything without a second thought.
One user put it hilariously. They said, "I miss the days when my knees didn't sound like a bowl of Rice Krispies every time I stood up."
Oh my gosh, that's a great one. But it speaks to this truth that our bodies do change. And those changes, they can sometimes feel like a loss. We might not have as much energy, our metabolism might slow down, and we might have to deal with aches and pains that we never even thought about when we were younger.
It's easy to fall into that trap of comparing ourselves to our younger selves and mourning the loss of that youthful vitality.
For sure. But I think it's really important to remember that aging is a natural process. Our bodies are always evolving. Instead of dwelling on what we've lost, what if we focused on appreciating the wisdom and strength our bodies have gained over time, all they've been through and all they've carried us through?
It's about shifting our perspective from one of lament to one of gratitude.
Yes. And realizing that even though we can't stop time, we can make choices that support our health and well-being.
So things like regular exercise, a balanced diet, getting enough sleep.
Exactly. Those things can have such a huge impact on how we feel, both physically and mentally.
It's never too late to start incorporating those healthy habits. Now, before we move on, I want to touch on one more theme that stood out in the Reddit thread, and it's a bit heavier. It's the theme of loss.
Loss. Yeah, it's a big one. It's something we all have to grapple with at some point. And I can see how it ties into this conversation about missing being young. When we're young, we often haven't experienced a lot of loss yet.
Right. And in the Reddit thread, a lot of people reflected on the loss of loved ones, particularly parents and grandparents.
Makes sense. It's such a fundamental part of the human experience.
One user just wrote, "My mom's hugs." Such a simple statement, but so powerful.
Oh, wow. It really highlights the irreplaceable nature of those bonds and the deep sense of loss that comes when they're gone.
And it reminds us that as we age, loss becomes a more frequent visitor in our lives.
Sadly, yes. And, those experiences can be incredibly painful, but they also shape us, deepen our empathy, and teach us about the preciousness of life.
It's about learning to ride those waves of grief while holding on to the love and memories that connect us to the people we've lost.
So well said. And, sometimes the loss we experience isn't about a person's physical absence, but about losing something within ourselves. That youthful sense of invincibility, that belief that anything is possible.
Absolutely. One user commented, "I miss feeling like I had my whole life ahead of me, with endless possibilities."
I get that. As we get older, we become more aware of our own mortality, and we might start to feel like our options are narrowing, that certain dreams or goals are no longer within reach.
Yeah, and it can be a bit sobering, that realization.
For sure. But it can also be a powerful motivator.
How so?
Well, it can push us to make the most of the time we have, to chase those passions we've put on hold, to create a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling, on our own terms. It's not too late.
It's about reframing the narrative around aging, from one of decline to one of continuous growth and evolution.
I love that.
And even though we might not be able to recapture the boundless energy and optimism of youth, we can find joy, purpose, and adventure in every stage of life.
Beautifully put.
Well, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to remind everyone that we'll be back soon to explore even more insights from this incredible Reddit thread.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
And in the meantime, we'd love to hear from you. What do you miss most about being young? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of the Soul for more thought-provoking deep dives into the human experience.
We'll be back soon to continue our exploration. Welcome back to Voices of the Soul. As we wrap up our exploration of what people miss about being young, one thing that keeps coming up for me is this theme of perspective, how it shifts over time.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How the things that seem so important to us in our younger years can take on a totally different meaning as we go through life, as we have more experiences.
Exactly. And in the Reddit thread, this really came through in the comments about knowledge and experience.
Oh, how so?
Well, some people talked about longing for that blissful ignorance of youth, like not knowing all the bad stuff in the world, while others seemed to really appreciate the wisdom they've gained through the years, even if it meant letting go of some of those idealistic views.
Makes sense. It's like we trade in some of that youthful certainty for a deeper, more nuanced understanding of how things really are.
Yeah, like realizing that the world isn't always black and white. There's a lot of gray areas.
Right. Lots of shades of gray.
And one user put it this way: "I miss the simplicity of seeing the world in black and white. Now everything is shades of gray."
That's a good one. And with that more nuanced understanding often comes a sense of humility, right?
Totally. Like realizing how much we don't actually know, how much there still is to learn.
It's humbling for sure.
Another user said, "I used to think I knew everything. Now I realize I know practically nothing."
It's so true, though. And in a way, it can be kind of freeing. It takes the pressure off of having to have all the answers, right? It allows us to approach life with more curiosity and be more open to new possibilities.
Exactly. It's all about embracing this idea of lifelong learning, recognizing that every experience, every encounter, every challenge, it's all an opportunity to learn and grow.
Definitely. And as we keep collecting those experiences, we start to see those patterns. We connect the dots. We start to get a deeper understanding of ourselves, of the world around us.
And that's where wisdom comes in.
Exactly.
It's not just about gathering information. It's about integrating that knowledge with our lived experiences and using it to navigate challenges with grace and make decisions that align with our values. And ultimately, to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
It's powerful stuff. And that wisdom, it can bring a sense of peace, a sense of acceptance about the things we can't control. It allows us to really focus on what matters.
And maybe even appreciate the simple things a little bit more. Because while we might miss the energy and that carefree spirit we had when we were younger, there are beautiful things we gain as we get older.
For sure.
A deeper understanding of what truly matters, a stronger sense of empathy and compassion, and a richer appreciation for those simple joys in life, for connection, for meaning, for just being alive.
And that's something worth celebrating at every age.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into what people miss about being young, I'm just feeling this sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for all the experiences, both good and bad, and for the incredible journey that is life. each and every stage of it.
Beautifully said. It's been such an insightful conversation.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe to Voices of the Soul for more deep dives into the human experience.
And be sure to check out Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel for more inspiring content.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep those soulful conversations going.